There's certain moments in one's history where it's hard to get around the truth. And the pandemic revealed not just the inequality, but it revealed just how decrepit the system is.
Hello and welcome to Inside America with me, Ghida Fakhry. Last week, I spoke with the esteemed American scholar Dr. Cornel West in a conversation ranging from his resignation from Harvard University over the summer to his description of former US President Barack Obama as a war criminal. This week, as promised, part 2 of my interview with Professor West, where we discuss America's growing polarization, its culture wars, Donald Trump's possible political comeback, reform of the US electoral system, and racial justice. Professor West, let me ask you about the electoral system and the need to reform the system, because we speak about democracy, but if democracy is predicated on the concept of one person, one vote, the US cannot be deemed then a democratic state, can it? Noam Chomsky puts it, I believe, in this way. He says the US Constitution would not even pass the democratic test according to the EU standards for European constitutions. Do you accept that? What needs to happen?
I tell you, my dear brother Noam Chomsky, he's been a truth teller a long time. He's still telling the truth. But, you look at it this way, too. Emma Goldman used to say that if one could fundamentally transform predatory capitalism by means of voting, voting would be illegal. And I think that Emma Goldman has a point that on the one hand, anything that would lead for the fundamental transformation of a greedy elite, of a predatory capitalist orientation of profit, money, cash, it will be repressed. See, that's why, to be a truth teller and to be a justice seeker is a tragicomic affair. That is to say, you are up against overwhelming circumstances and you do it anyway because it's right and it's moral and you're keeping a tradition alive, a tradition of the past of people who are lied about, assassinated, incarcerated, marginalized, misunderstood, misconstrued. You also will undergo the same condition. Pass it on to the next generation. Why? Because we can still make progress.
But can we make progress here? I mean, politically speaking, within the electoral system, is it even thinkable for you that, for instance, the President of the United States would be elected directly by the American people through direct universal suffrage, or at least a proportional system, not through the electoral college system, which doesn't always align with the vote of the majority of Americans?
No, it's true. That's very true. That's very true. But even if you had direct elections, if you still had a market-driven system where the only candidates were those who were able to gain access to big money from donors and benefactors, then you still got a system of legalized bribery and normalized corruption, even though you got direct election. We had the same problem in the Black freedom movement, right? We fight for the right to vote, and then Black folk get a chance to vote, but who are they voting for? They're voting for candidates who've already been selected by the corporate elites who provide big money, and they need that big money in order to run for election. You can't even be a candidate unless you have millions of dollars these days, even on the local level. Where are you going to get that money from? From the corporate elites. So even when you have a robust system of voting, who they're voting for has already been selected by the corporate elites themselves. So they're not going to talk about Wall Street the way Brother Bernie talks about it. Bernie Sanders.
I was just about to ask you, could Bernie Sanders ever have a real shot at the presidency given all of this?
Well, we discovered, I mean, we were together. I remember hugging Bernie and we giving speeches in Nevada and it looked like we were going to win this thing. And Obama makes a phone call and tells all the neoliberal candidates to drop out and get behind Biden because we must do anything to stop Bernie Sanders. So you got that neoliberal coming together to crush the social democratic Bernie. Bernie's no revolutionary. You know, he's a social democratic candidate in a decrepit electoral political system that views him as some kind of communist or socialist. And he calls himself a democratic socialist, but his policies are Roosevelt, FDR. His policies are New Deal policies. His policies are social democratic policies, you see, so that it was clear that that we in the Bernie Sanders campaign, we scared the neoliberals to death because they're donors, they're benefactors, Wall Street, Silicon Valley elites at the top. We got frightened.
But so if the system is so corrupt and decrepit, as you say, which practical, achievable reform would you advocate? Because clearly the US system is being threatened from within. We saw that in the insurrection, which many would say was an attempted coup d'etat.
Oh yeah, it was. A neo-fascist one.
Could another insurrection take place when you look at the number of armed
I'm
militias
sure,
in the US?
Another one's coming. I'm sure another one's coming. There's no doubt about that. Just like when we were there in Charlottesville back in 2017 and people were saying, oh my God, we got this unification of the Ku Klux Klan and the neo-Nazis and all of the crypto fascists. Is this going to be an isolated event? No, it's been crescendo, it's been escalating, it's been intensifying. You see, we did hold it back. That was the reason why I voted for Biden. I had to hold my nose and vote for the architect of the vicious system of mass incarceration. I had to hold my nose and vote for the defender of the war crimes of given the US invasion and occupation of Iraq with all the precious Iraqi lives that were lost, and they don't even count them in the American media as if an Iraqi life doesn't mean anything. I can't stand that kind of indifference. But I voted for Biden anyway because it's an anti-fascist vote. And I'm trying to push back Trump and his fascist forces. And with Biden winning, and yet still at the moment not having enough gumption and not having enough will to fight for voting rights for Black people, to fight against the voting suppression by calling into question the filibuster, still being militaristic, still expanding the military budget, still expanding billions of dollars now to Israel. They already got $4 billion for their vicious treatment of Palestinians. You say, well, this is the empire in deep trouble. But we must fight. That's the bottom line.
We must fight.
Yes,
but can you fight against these forces? Can you really push them back? Because some Americans might take offense at my question, but is there a risk of a civil war in the United States? Is that possible at all when you look at the level of acrimony and discord in the country, not just on the streets of America, also in the halls of Congress? You have lawmakers making threats to other members of Congress. We just heard recently Congresswoman Ilhan Omar, a Muslim member of Congress from Minnesota, being the target of threatening Islamophobic comments from Republican members of Congress.
It's always a possibility. There's no doubt about it. We already had one of the most barbaric of all civil wars in the modern world. 750,000 died in the 1860s in the United States. And what you talk about is very real. There's always that possibility. There's no doubt about it.
The possibility of a civil war.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Of a race war. That's always a possibility. The right wing and the fascists have been calling for it for a while. And there's already these micro wars that are taking place in terms of the vicious assaults and attacks on people, on Black people, on poor people, and so on. But you're talking about a whole scale civil war. Now, we're far from that, thank God. But there's always that possibility because the paranoia and the distrust are so pervasive. And the poverty and the wealth inequalities, they are grotesque. And the homelessness in major urban centers in New York and Los Angeles, right at the very moment when all of the housing values are going up, you're getting this increase in massive homelessness. Is just spiritually sick at the deepest level. And sooner or later, it will snap. You're right. It cannot hold.
It cannot hold. And when you see the way the country is so polarized, so divided down the middle, looking ahead to the next elections, could Trump make a political comeback?
Oh, there's no doubt about it.
You can see him sitting in the Oval Office again.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. With the failure of neoliberal rule and Americans thinking that the only choice they have, any sense of order, is neoliberalism, milquetoast, neo-fascism, robust, then the neo-fascists become more and more attractive and appealing to misguided, myopic fellow citizens. And that's what is frightening about this situation.
And of course, there's this constant tug of war among Americans on either side of the spectrum, among Democrats as well, the progressives, the moderates. You've described yourself as a non-Marxist socialist. How do you see these ideological culture wars between and among Americans playing out today on the far right, the far left, and the racial undertones?
Yeah, see, I am first and foremost a revolutionary Christian. And what I mean by that is that I don't subscribe to any ism. You see, there's vicious things done in the name of socialism and communism. There's vicious things done in the name of capitalism. There's vicious things done in the name of Christianity and Islam and Judaism and Buddhism and so forth. The question is, what does integrity look like in the face of oppression? The question is, what does honesty and courage that is tied to the empowerment of poor and working people, what does that look like in the face of domination? And so when I say I'm a non-Marxian socialist, I mean, I learned much from the Marxist tradition in terms of the critique of capitalism and the asymmetric relations of power at the workplace and the subordination of workers to capital and bosses. You can't understand the modern world without understanding Marx's critique of capitalism. You don't have to be a socialist to accept it, but there's some deep truths in terms of the exploitation of working people and the obsession with profit maximization. By socialist, all I mean is radical democratic expansion of mechanisms that provide some accountability against any form of elite rule, any form of imperial domination. And so the closest thing that we have in the modern world has been the socialist tradition at its best, at its democratic best. The socialist tradition at its non-democratic best have been barbaric. I mean, Stalin, Mao, and other gangsters who engaged in massive murders and atrocities and so forth. So, and right now, you look at the United States, you got the US empire on the one hand, you got Chinese empire on the other. Those are the two dominant mega powers in the world right now. Both of them deeply oppressive, both of them deeply authoritarian. The United States has much better personal liberties and so forth. I agree with that, but it has its own structures of domination. And so the question becomes, as a revolutionary Christian like myself, how do I remain true to the suffering and the misery of poor people, no matter where they are, no matter what color, be they under Chinese, be they under the United States, be they in Africa, Asia, and so forth, and provide ways of fighting against it to ensure that their dignity is affirmed.
But as you know, there is, though, this sort of knee-jerk reaction from so many Americans against any notion of socialism.
That's true.
But do you believe that the COVID-19 pandemic has actually, somehow exposed, unveiled the limits of capitalism, the inherent injustices of the system? The US, as you say, there's the US and China, but the US seems to be gradually losing its top spot as the world's largest economy. To what extent has this pandemic been a wake-up call for Americans?
Well, I think it has been a wake-up call because, see, Americans, we traditionally have been so obsessed with success, or as Du Bois put it, to believe in the efficacy of lies and therefore have a fear of the truth. And there's certain moments in one's history where it's hard to get around the truth. And the pandemic revealed not just the inequality, but it revealed just how decrepit the system is. And it's hard to deny it, you see. And once you reach that point, the question becomes, well, what can be done? What can be done? And if you conclude that not a lot can be done, then you feel a sense of paralysis. You feel debilitated and depressed and despondent. And that's where a lot of Americans are, the escalating levels of depression and nihilism and pessimism and hopelessness and powerlessness and impotence. I mean, that's where a large number of Americans are. You see it in the drugs, you see it in self-medication, you see it in alcoholism, you see it in the forms of addiction. These are forms of spiritual emptiness that are shot through the American civilization. You see it in self-violation, escalating suicides. You see it in self-flagellation, in self-violation. So much of the culture has to do with self-medication. And then, you look at the species as a whole. Does the species have the capacity to avoid self-destruction in the face of ecological catastrophe and possible nuclear catastrophe? These are all deeply spiritual issues. And the question becomes, how do you sustain hope? How do you sustain your integrity and honesty and decency in the face of this kind of grimness? And it's here, where the blues comes in, because I come from the blues people, you see. We confront catastrophe every day with a smile and a style and keep moving and keep fighting and keep laughing, because we know that the future is unfinished and incomplete, even though the future looks blank at times, given the nightmarish quality of the present. Well, see, those are deeply spiritual issues. So to be a revolutionary Christian is to be in solidarity with any oppressed people against any structure of domination and keep the love at the center of it rather than revenge, keep the justice at the center of it rather than simply creating a new form of domination as you fight domination. We've seen anti-colonial struggles become neo-colonial forms of domination all through parts of the world where we have to be morally consistent. We have to be in solidarity with poor and working people no matter what.
But keeping the justice at the center of it, I mean, is there a need for a new global economic order, a new international order?
Absolutely.
So something that would render, some form of justice to people, not just in America, but around the world. I mean, just how realistic would this be? Who would take the lead? We saw that even in the... Well, we saw that even in the face of this pandemic, which threatened everybody across the world, there was this nationalistic reflex that kicked in. Vaccine nationalism was a vivid proof. Do you see the possibility of an emerging new consciousness, a new leadership to save humanity, as you say?
Well, there's no doubt that we need an international consciousness, a global sensibility. Nationalism is probably the most powerful ideology, just like predatory capitalism is the most powerful force of the modern world. And so we have to be able to bring critique to bear on nationalism and critiques to bear on predatory capitalism in the name of the precious and priceless humanity of each and every one of us. The progressive internationalists that Noam Chomsky and Brother David Adler and others and myself have tried to work with and be a part of is a kind of foretelling of what you're talking about, the call for a new kind of global order, which is more egalitarian, that is more sensitive to different cultures, that puts poor and working people at the center rather than corporate elites at the center. And this is always...
But to do that, Dr. West, I mean, to do that, you have to be at the table, don't you? When you see the state of affairs in the world, in your own country here in the United States, are you tempted to enter politics to affect change?
I mean, you never know. You never know. You see, as a Christian, you're always open to being a vehicle for whatever sense of morality and spirituality can be manifest in your witness, so that you don't know what form your calling will take. You know your calling is to be in solidarity with poor and working people, no matter what. To die, laugh, fight, be at the table, overthrow the table. It depends on what the context is. You know what I mean? But when you have a political system that is just so, as you say, broken and corrupt, and you want to be a truth teller, it is very difficult to be inside of that system and be a kind of thoroughgoing truth teller. That's why I have such respect for my dear brother Bernie Sanders. He's independent, but he works with the milquetoast neoliberal Democrats. He puts pressure on them. He fights the neo-fascist Republicans in a principled way. But my calling is much more on the outside at the moment. But who knows? Who knows? As fascism begins to become more pervasive, that one may have to shift. It's hard to say.
Do you feel that your voice, which is already eminently political, would be even more potent if you did at some stage enter the political fray, if the system allows you to remain the person you are?
It's hard to say. It really is hard to say. You know what I mean? There's no doubt about it. I tend to think of it in terms of this analogy, though. You see, I'm a jazz man, the life of the mind, and it's difficult to join a military band when you're playing blue notes. They will flatten your blue notes into some square notes very quickly.
And talking about you continuing to sing and dance to your own tune, Professor, you're teaching a new online philosophy masterclass, I know, on what it means to be human. Here's a quick preview.
What does it mean to be a featherless, two-legged, linguistically conscious creature born between urine and feces, whose body will soon be the culinary delight of terrestrial worms? That's what philosophy is all about. Every generation of the human species has to come to terms with how to love, how to live. How you gonna deal with the catastrophe? How you gonna preserve your style?
What is it like for you to teach this course, and how do the rest of us sign up?
Oh, I've had a wonderful time in teaching this master class. I work with some wonderful folk, Brother Jahan, and Sister Nicole, and Brother Rob, and others. And the very fact that it's now available to people all around the world, that they could actually see, a Black man teaching philosophy through the lens of oppressed people, so that the conversation with Socrates and Plato and Augustine and Franz Fanon and Fannie Lou Hamer and Sarah Vaughan and John Coltrane and Malcolm X becomes integral to any talk about philosophy, and the connections of the Sankofa and Africa, and the great traditions that flow from the African continent into the grand Socratic legacies of Athens and prophetic legacies of Jerusalem. That's what I was able to do in that 5-part class, and we have a good time. We have a good time.
That's wonderful. Hopefully we will sign up to this masterclass and hear more of you. But for now, Dr. West, I can't thank you enough for spending so much time with us and for sharing your great insights. It's a great pleasure to see you.
And again, I salute you, my dear sister. I salute you.
It is rare to have a contemporary scholar reach both national and international prominence. Here in the United States, just two come to mind. Noam Chomsky, Professor Emeritus at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, MIT, the father of modern linguistics, and Cornel West, Professor Emeritus at Princeton University. Both are philosophers, and both are sharp critics of the American political system, of systemic injustices, of US foreign policy, including Washington's blind support of Israel and its occupation of Palestine. This is a red line in the US media and academic world. Cornel West, who is a rare product of American academia, is also a critic of the unequal educational system. Academic freedoms do exist in the US, and Cornel West embodies them. But he also embodies the reality that any criticism of Israeli policies and support of the rights of Palestinians remains taboo and is even criminalized. To date, 33 state legislatures have passed laws to punish proponents of the boycott, divestment, and sanctions movement. And so, in short, while Cornel West knows that a growing number of universities are actively going after scholars like him who dare to speak out on some of these taboo subjects, it hasn't deterred him. The irony in all of this is that 40 years after the US Supreme Court ruled that boycotts are protected under the Constitution's First Amendment, guaranteeing Americans freedom of speech, some issues are still a red line. That's all from all of us here in Washington for this week. From me, Ghida Fakhry, and the team, thanks for watching.